feel free to keep the gallery. All right. So as we move forward, again, you're already modeling it. Please feel free to continue to populate the chat with questions, comments. Heather is going to be reading these and uplifting ideas. We are going to have a conversation as a panel. So to my panelists, please feel free to build upon each other. I'm going to throw a question out there and come to a few people, but feel free to just add on an idea. This is meant to be interactive. So without further ado, I'm going to pose the first question. And so as you prepare your answer, please introduce yourself with your name, your role, and your pronouns, just so that we can all be on the same accord, okay? And so the question that I want to start with is the one from the keynote session. What makes a good school? In your opinion, what makes a good school? And so I'm just going to come alphabetically to Christina Balkaran and have you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Christina Balkaran. I am a math transformation coach at Madison Park Technical Vocational High School. I thought a lot about this question prior to this showcase. And as a math coach, I work primarily with teachers on supporting them in their math practice. And so I think like teachers, right, and educators really are the backbone of our schools. They, like we said in the keynote, right, we are the on the front line supporting students and you know, really investing in our kids. So I definitely want to start off by saying that educators are really instrumental in making schools what they are today.
Wonderful, thank you. It's so key. It's so key. And I know that this room is full of educators and educator supporters. And so just thank you for kicking us off with that great point. And so I'm going to come to Yozmin Gay-Draper, and please correct me if I've mispronounced anything.
You did not. That was perfect, and that's rare. I get any and everything under the sun, but it's okay. My name is Yozmin Gay-Draper, Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Opportunity Gaps, Boston Public Schools. I am about 8 months into the role, but really excited to work with EdVestors on a couple of projects, and one of them is the implementation of our school-based equity roundtables. So I thought about this question too deeply. You know, as a former teacher, principal, district leader, and having an opportunity to work with ed leaders in various parts of the country, it's a question that we ask all the time. You know, what is a good school? In our all leader meeting today, I shared a quote from Dr. Dania Martin and his paper, Learning Mathematics While Black, is really key in this conversation. I think digging deep around knowing your students, their identity, their ability, their experiences, their culture, and making sure that that is deeply embedded into their learning spaces. Because what we find out is that with our Black and brown children is that they don't see themselves in the learning space. And that is because American education was never designed for Black and brown children, if we want to be really honest, right? So what we have to do is dismantle the systems, right, that perpetuate racial harm in education. Going back to the great Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right? So we have to do things differently. We have to come through the lens of the student. What does the student bring? Their value to the learning space is really what makes a good school.
Great. Thank you, Yozmin. And that's it's 2 points in the same. We have to recognize what students are bringing into this space, and because so many times it's not tabula rasa. They are not blank slates. They are bringing with them a wealth of knowledge, and we've had
their funds, yes.
We've had this wonderful experience through some of our work to really understand the notions of cultural wealth, which is essentially the navigational capacity, the familial, the social capital that all students of color have and hold. And so thank you for lifting that up as well. I would love to come to Catherine Killen.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Killen, and I'm an assistant director for career services here at the Boston PIC. I use the She series. Thinking about this question, I tend to agree with a lot of what Jack said when he referenced kindergarteners and student joy. I think when we're thinking about how successful a school is or what makes a good school, we should really look at the students and how happy are they to be in the school building. Do they run to the door after the classes end to go home, or do they choose to engage further in clubs, sports, other extracurriculars? Do they want to stay in the building and engage with their teachers, their peers, and really pursue more there because they feel safe and engaged in that space?
Thank you. We're covering so much, and I know it's all gonna weave together because we've talked about educators, we've talked about students and who they are, and then we've talked about the safety that they feel in the school building. And this makes so much sense. And I have the privilege to actually be able to come to Lenny Tejeda, and be able to ask from the student perspective, what makes a good school with what we've just anything that we've covered so far?
Honestly, in my perspective, I think that a good school isn't only made out of good test scores. So back to what Catherine said, she does have a good point. Like, our kids rushing to get to the door, because I feel like if they're staying behind class, if they're staying for a club, then I feel like they really feel safe and they feel like it's a good environment for them to be in. That every day they wake up to go to school, not only just because they have to go, but because they enjoy the time that they're there.
Powerful, absolutely powerful. And it's such a marker. One of my follow-up questions was going to be, how do we measure in ways that we haven't been measuring what is a good school? And what I heard you just say is whether students are willing to be there, whether they see, whether young people see it as like, this is a place I want to take my time, which is valuable, and put it in here. So I thank you for lifting that up, Lenny. I'm now going to come to Dr. Dania Vazquez, and just the last question.
I actually want to challenge the group because I want to reframe the question. Asking ourselves what a good school is, there's the other side, right? It becomes binary, good or bad. And I rather us ask, what makes a school create agency in young people and civic leadership in young people? What are those qualities that create young people that then want to serve the community? Like Lenny, we keep picking Lenny for lots of things in our school because he has a beautiful voice, but he's also speaking for all of the students in the school. He's pretty connected to lots of kids in the school. And so I don't like that construct of good or bad, successful, not successful. You know, it's an old paradigm, and it's also a dominant culture paradigm, to be quite honest. And I think we can never get out of really helping to define how schools create agency and civic leadership in our young people. If we are in that kind of duality. And that duality then perpetuates the kind of testing and the kind of measurement that our panelists were talking about earlier. There's no other way to measure good or bad, right? You get stuck in the numbers crunch. It's much harder to measure qualitative aspects of a school. Is there commitment of the adult community to the vision of the school? Is there a vision in the school? Or do students get it? Do students have voice? Is there a space for reflection? And all of those things take time. And in our, sort of American society, we're used to making things happen quickly. And if they don't happen quickly and in a certain way, they're not validated. And actually, things that have value take time to nurture and grow and develop. And so it's kind of counterintuitive, and they're hard to measure, actually. I'll leave it at that.
No, it's a powerful point. So thank you for so much for just dropping the mic there. It is a very powerful point, and it is hard to measure. And so we at EdVestors have really been challenging ourselves to think about what we are measuring. And so we recently, as a group, read the book Street Data. And I know that may be familiar to many folks, and I believe my colleague Heather is going to drop a link eventually in the chat. And so, but a similar notion of how do we capture the experience in ways that are different. It may not be a quantitative metric. It may be qualitative and through conversation and through other means. And so I thank you for lifting that up. I want to go to the next conversation. I really appreciated both in the panel, but in the keynote, but also in this panel space of like, how do we change the question? How do we get to the right question so that we can have a fruitful conversation? So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you all is, what is needed by your peers? What is needed by educators who we need to take better care of? What is needed by students? What is needed by partners, by our administrators? And I want to pause and say, I don't know if that's the right question. What is needed? If it is, please feel free to answer it. But if it's a different question, I would encourage you to push back so we can get to that right question. So I'm going to come to Dania. Since you modeled it, I'm going to come back to you first.
I think it's not what's needed, but what is valued. And if we can lift up and start talking about what we all value together, we might actually get to more clarity about what we need to see in schools. Sort of in another sort of twist to my answer to you is, we need to celebrate the good. We're so accustomed to picking out what's not working, and especially after this pandemic, there's so much conversation about how schools and teachers and principals and kids failed. We're all, we've made ourselves out to be miserable. And actually, there's a lot of good. I'm proud of my community. I'm proud of our Muniz students who, like, we're all still struggling. Like, we're not where we want to be. Am I right, Lenny? But I think that we're struggling through it. And so I can be proud of the struggle. Although we're not to the recovered place that I would like us to be, but I can be proud of the struggle and I can value that. And so I think we need to celebrate so much that people have uncovered and learned about themselves and each other. And I just don't think we're into celebrating. We're into a very sort of, as a country, in a very negative space, and sort of what's not working and what's not working for me. I think we also need to turn our attention to what it means to be in community, and move away from the I, me. What's important to me only. I'm only as good as my whole community together. And so how can we shift the conversation from me, I, to community?
Thank you. Thank you for that reframe, and thank you for just uplifting that community piece. Really resonates. And so I'm actually going to come back to Catherine as a community partner in this. And so it's panelist choice. What is needed, or what would be valuable? Like, what helps enable the next step? The other thing is just a preview, is we are going to talk about what needs to be continued and what we are going to celebrate. That's going to be our closing. So get ready for that, because we are going to change the game and walk out of the room and celebrate. So Catherine, need or value? Thanks,
Livonia. I think something that we value as partners, especially here at the PIC, comes right back to community, comes right back to my earlier answer that Lenny was also talking about, which is a strong after-school culture. A culture that welcomes students to continue to stay in the building and engage with partners, especially because that's definitely our our strongest time to meet with our students and engage them in our content that we're able to offer, which for those of you who don't know, it's career readiness, exploration, and matching students with paid summer jobs and internships over the summer. So we don't want to take away from teacher time during the day whenever we can. We like to have those after school workshops and one-on-one meetings with students. And it's something that in many of our schools is a very, very strong after school culture. And it's something that we definitely need to get our work done. So that's something that has kind of fallen off over the course of the past couple of years, and students are more eager, we see at the end of the school day, to get home, which we totally understand. But it's something that we're working on building back.
Thank you. And I noticed, Lenny, that you were nodding your head during some of the comments. So I do want to come to you and hear what's needed or what's valuable, especially around this concept of time and space, and that school days are at least 8 hours or 6 hours plus after school stuff.
Okay, so with that, I feel like this conversation can go multiple different ways as in needed and valued. But I say, what would we want? So for an after school, so if we're gonna talk about like stuff that students want to do after school, like what would they want to do? Would they want to be with their team if they choose sports? Would they want to do a book club, chess club, anime club, like stuff like that? Whereas like students will be interested into actually going and participating. And not only will that club just be for the main stuff, like what for the main stuff what it's named after. So if it's an anime club or a book club, not just that, but they can also learn other stuff from their peers, because it would be peers from different grades, different adults in the building that they may not have gotten to talk to. And for values, things that I value in my school as is our community. It's a pretty strong community, I would say, stronger than most schools, because most schools, not all students know each other. Here, I feel like we have a good job at doing that, and a good job and a good way to interact with other people in our school.
Thank you. And I appreciate you pulling out the nuance of what makes school community. Again, I'm hearing that community piece coming through loud and clear, like what makes it a place to be and learn, and also the intergenerationalness of it across grades and across staff. So just thank you so much. Yozmin, I saw you raise your hand, so please go ahead, jump in.
Sure. Just such good conversation. And I would love to add to that sense of community. And someone put in Ubuntu, we talked about that early today. You know, it's I am because we are. It's about who I am amongst my community, right? That moves away from that Western philosophy of Aristotle and Socrates, where there's this individualistic virtue, but more Ubuntu, that we are because we are about community. So a couple things really quickly I wanted to name here is that I think what we need and what we should value, so Dania, thank you for raising that, right, is that we need to transfer power to each other. There's a transfer of power that is needed within a community, a transfer of power to students, from students back to teachers, to leaders, from leaders back to the teachers, right? So there's this notion of care from Nell Noddings, that relationship between the carer and the cared for, right? And so it's not considered virtuous or even valuable unless the cared for reacts to the carer. So when we think about the relationships that we have for students, it's not considered valuable unless the student feels, right, that there is care in that building, and vice versa. So I just want to be able to emphasize that there needs to be a transfer of power as we move towards a community of learning and practice. One thing I wanted to say about Jennifer's notion of resiliency, and this is just a tiny push on that, just a bit of a push. What she didn't mention is that what are we resilient about? Because racial harm on our children have been perpetuated for centuries. Well, only seems like America's resilient when they have to be, right? I.e. George Floyd, i.e. the pandemic. Resiliency should be our way of doing and being, right? So when we think about this, I think about MLK's letter of Birmingham jail that any change that America makes is through force. How do we change that? How do we make that particular change? We do that by making sure that we are transferring our power, saying what it is that you need, how can I care for you, what does it mean when I care for you, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of things that I had mentioned there, but just to kind of summarize it, I think that we need to make sure that we're transferring power to each other.
Livonia, may I add one other thing?
Sure.
And that is, I feel like those of us around the screen are pretty like-minded, and we can celebrate that. I do think that we need to talk to others who are not like-minded, and bring them into the room,
That's good.
so that we can have this conversation, because we can't transfer power unless we're talking to those
Yes.
who actually hold the power and may not want to give away the power,
Exactly.
or who have different perspectives on what's a good school, air quotes, or a good teacher, or whatever the theme is. So I think we need to bring those folks into the room with us.
I love that, Dania.
Thank you all. Thank you both for sharing. And it really, honestly, it ties back to something Lenny said, and I heard it, and you all saying it really reminded me of like being able to name what kind of club students wanted to participate in. Like that felt like student voice. And so like, that's just one way that we are bringing up sort of, I'm going to say empowerment and not necessarily transfer of power, because it's also, for me, what I was hearing, an opportunity to empower, to build on the assets that we already have. And then also, as what I heard is like, make room and make space. And so I want to appreciate what I'm hearing and what this space is. It's an opportunity for us to have a conversation, and raise different ideas, different notions, and have a dialogue. And I was talking to my colleague just this morning about being able to have good conversations, even in spaces where we may not think the same, and how important that is. It goes back to civic engagement. So I really, really appreciate what you all are lifting up. Christina, I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to weigh in. I've noticed, just engagement all along. So I want to make space for you for sure.
Thanks, Livonia. Yeah, I've just been writing down so much of what I've heard everyone say. And Yozmin, when you talk about transfer of power, I think about, or when we even talk about power, I think about trust. And, often what I've seen is that leaders struggle with that, right? Teachers sometimes struggle with that because they're, even when it's teacher to student or school leader to teacher, school leader to student, because of the trust, how important that is. And when I think about what teachers need, it really goes back to what we've been saying and what Lenny has said around, we want to be heard. Teachers need to be heard, students need to be heard, and we need to listen. And I will say that, like, when I became a coach, and I'm a newer coach, was a high school math teacher previously. I said that I wanted to hear and I wanted to listen, but I wasn't really listening. I think I went in with my own perceptions of what I think should be happening. And then when I looked at the data and I didn't see the results, I really had to take a step back and see it. Let's ask myself, am I really listening? And I wasn't. And that's hard to do, right? Because you have to be vulnerable. You have to really ask yourself the hard questions. But I think, and like Jack and Jennifer's podcast is called Have You Heard? And so I think it's just, especially now, there's so much that we've learned coming back into schools, from remote learning, from hybrid teaching. And I think it's just so important that when we ask teachers, educators, students for their voices and their opinions and what they think, that we listen to what they say and then we act on it, right? And that's another piece that's hard, because that's when you need to start bringing in all of your stakeholders, right? And so it's not enough to just listen. It's not even enough to just hear, but like, let's now take some action, right? So that we can make changes in student outcomes.
Mhm.
Great. And I just have to say thank you, Christina, because in what you said, the recognition, the self-recognition to observe and learn and adapt, like that's a whole nother body of work as well. So just thank you so much for lifting that up, the point and just the self-recognition in that moment as well. So many of us are trying to do that, and it's just great to hear that example in this space. So I know that our time is coming short. We probably have about 5 minutes left in this space. And so I would love, in just a minute, this is a forum that we've talked about community. We've talked about changing the narrative. And so this is a forum where I would love from each of you, one thing that needs to continue or one thing that we need to celebrate. We are a body of listeners that can take it into different spaces like, hey, I heard this great thing is going on. So from each panelist, 1 minute or less, one thing that we should just take away as a continuation or celebration. And so I'll come back to Yozmin, if you're okay with it.
Oh, goodness. I was thinking as you were talking. I think it's developing just in 30 seconds, but I'm still stuck on elevating student voice. You know, I love that we have a student here on the panel. It's so important, but just continuing to think about how we can lift students' funds of knowledge as assets, as Christine said, to the work.
Awesome. Catherine, something to celebrate, something in the work to celebrate.
My answer really builds off of Yozmin's and what Christina was talking about as well. Student voice is so important. And I think that during the pandemic, we at the PIC turned more to students to guide us. You know, across BPS, we had this issue of attendance. We were seeing low attendance, and we had to take a step back and evaluate when would be the best time in the day to engage with our students and how should we do that? So we really turn to students and say, when is best for you? What do you need from us? And we found that sweet spot of meeting with students was in the late afternoon, early evening, that 4 to 6 time after they were done with their schoolwork, maybe had rested a little, had a snack, taken care of their responsibilities at home before they were settled down to dinner. And now even post-pandemic, well, we're not really post-pandemic, but we're back in the school building every day, meeting with students face-to-face. We've kept that practice of having some virtual programming later in the day. Even though we're seeing students in the building, we found that that was a really convenient time for them to meet with us. They were like, it's better if, you know, once I'm at home, I've settled in, I can hop on and really engage and focus in this content. So we've kept that, and we've seen better attendance in this time than even pre-pandemic. And I really credit that to the students and actually asking the students what's good for you. So yeah.
Dania, would you mind jumping in as well? Something to celebrate.
You know, I ditto on all the things, but I actually want to celebrate disturbing the norm. And I think that the pandemic, though it has been awful in so many ways, has also forced us to really dig deep and think about, why are we doing things the way we're doing? And really asking ourselves some hard questions. And so we have lots of hard conversations going on here at the Muniz. And I want to celebrate those hard conversations and empower them. I also want to celebrate, at least in our school, that we really, through this difficult time, identity and community has been affirmed as real through lines in the work that has been before the pandemic, and it stayed steady through the pandemic. And the last thing I want to celebrate is this idea that that we can reinvent school, and that we're all engaged in that. So, and thank you for all of you. I think did Lenny get some time?
Yes, so we have 50 seconds. I think you're, so Christina and Lenny, you all get the final word. Thank you to our panelists. And if we get Zoom pulled, thank you all for being here. So Christina and then Lenny in 36 seconds.
Lenny, you go for it.
Okay, so I would honestly like to elaborate a little bit more on what Christina said about listening. I honestly feel like school could really change a lot, and their perspective about school could really change a lot if we actually started listening with an open mind and with an open heart to students, because we do have a lot of good ideas that a lot of the time we say out of a joke, but it actually does help the community out a lot more than what a lot of adults think. And that's about time. But thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me.